Hello, children. Today we will start with another topic, that is factors affecting demand. So far, we have done the concept of demand and the types of demand. Now we will be doing factors affecting demand. Now, the first factor which affects demand is the price of the commodity. We have seen that when the price of certain commodity is high, we tend to buy less units of it. But as the price falls, we buy more units of it. So normally there is an inverse relation between the price of the commodity and its quantity demanded. I have highlighted the word inverse relationship. That means when the price is high, the demand would be less, and when the price is low, the demand would be high. This type of demand is also known as price demand. You can make a note somewhere. It is also called as the price demand. The second factor which affects demand is income of the consumers. Now, when we are writing that how does the income of the consumer affects demand, you must write these three categories of goods, because if you don't write all these three categories, you will not fetch full marks. So if you are asked to write that how does the income of the consumer affects demand, you have to write that there are three types of goods: normal goods, inferior goods, and inexpensive goods of necessities. Now, normal goods usually refers to the goods of comfort and luxury. So in this case, when the income of the consumer increases, the demand for such commodity will also increase. So there is a direct relationship between the income of the consumer and the demand for the commodity. You can see here I have made a graph. On the x-axis is the quantity of the commodity and y-axis represents the income of the consumers. So in case of normal goods, as the income increases, the quantity demanded also is increasing. So this is the case of normal goods. Next is the inferior goods. Now these are those goods the demand for which falls with the increase in income. Now this consists of the coarse cereal like maize, jowar. These are the coarse cereal. You can also take as the inferior quality of clothes. That also comes under the category of inferior goods. So when the income of the consumer is low, he tends to buy these coarse grains. When up to a certain level, the income increases. You can see here in the graph, the x-axis represents the quantity and the y represents the income. So here to an extent, when the income is increasing, you can see that the curve is upward sloping. That means here, till an extent, with the increase in income, the quantity demanded for the inferior goods would increase. But after a certain point, you see that with the increase in income, the quantity demanded for inferior goods falls. Now, why does it fall? Because now the consumers prefer to have the superior cereals. They were earlier having maize and jowar, which was considered as inferior cereal. Now, wheat and rice are considered as the superior cereal. So now they switch from the consumption of maize and jowar to the consumption of rice and wheat. So in case of inferior goods, you will write that these are those goods, the demand for which falls with the increase in income of the consumers, and you will give the example. And then the third type of goods is inexpensive goods of necessities like salt. Now, though it is inexpensive, but it is very important part of your food. So this is called as inexpensive goods of necessities. Now, what happens when the income increases? The demand for this may increase to an extent, to a certain extent, not too much, but to a certain extent, small extent. But after that, it becomes constant, no matter what your income becomes. After this level of consumption, you will not want to increase the consumption. Now, you will add salt into the vegetables. You will not add vegetable into the salt. So what happens when the income increases? The demand for such commodity increases to an extent and then it becomes constant. So you can see here that initially in the third diagram, that as the income is increasing, the quantity demanded has increased, and thereafter you can see that this curve has become parallel to the y-axis, which shows that no matter what the income is, the quantity demanded would remain the same. So whenever you are writing that how does the income affect the demand for a commodity, you must always mention these three types of goods and then explain the effect of income on the demand for these commodities. You must always write example, and wherever possible you must try and draw the graph. The next factor is price of related goods. Now there are two types of related goods. One is the substitute goods and the other is the complementary goods. Now, substitute goods are those goods which can be used in place of one another, such as tea and coffee, Pepsi and Coke. Now, these two goods, they have same type of use. That means they will satisfy the same want. All right. Now, if you are thirsty, you can either have water or you can have Pepsi. Both will serve the same function. So these are called as the substitute goods. Now, there is a direct relation between the price of the commodity and the demand for its substitute goods. You can see here, I have taken the example of tea and coffee. Now, if the price of tea falls, what will happen to the demand for coffee? Now, say the price of tea is 20 and the demand for coffee is 30. Now, if the price of tea falls, tea becomes cheaper as compared to coffee, more cheaper. So, people who are consuming coffee will now shift to the consumption of tea. So, what will happen to the demand for coffee? The demand for coffee would fall. Now, if the price of tea becomes 50, if the price rises, tea becomes costlier as compared to coffee. So people who are consuming tea will switch to the consumption of coffee. So with the rise in price of tea, the demand for coffee would increase. So there is a direct relationship between the price of the commodity and demand for its substitute good. So you can see from here, the graph shows that as the price of the tea is rising, from P1 it becomes P2, the quantity for coffee increases from Q1 to Q2. So, when you're writing price of related goods, you will write substitute goods. You will explain what substitute goods are, those goods which can be used in place of one another, and then you will explain the effect, that there is a direct relationship between the price of the commodity and demand for its substitute. Then you have complementary goods. Now these are the goods which are used together and they satisfy one type of want. For example, car and petrol. Now car and petrol is required if you have to travel certain distance. Now, now what is the relation between the price of car and the demand for petrol? Now if the price of car is high, lesser number of people would purchase it and therefore demand for petrol would fall. So the price of car is rising, the demand for petrol is falling. So there is an inverse relationship between the price of the commodity and the demand for its substitute good. Okay. So there's an inverse relationship. You can see it from here. The curve here is a downward sloping curve, which shows that when the price of petrol is high, the demand for car is lower. And when the price of petrol falls, the demand for the car increases. So, like you have explained in case of income of the consumer, you are explaining all three types of goods. Similarly, if you are asked to explain that how does the price of related goods affect the demand, you will have to explain substitute goods and the complementary goods. The next factor is customers' taste and preference. Now, I have highlighted here, you can see taste and preference depends on social customs, habits of the people, fashion, general lifestyle of the people, advertisements, new inventions. Now, if a person is habituated to something, if a person is a smoker, he'll keep demanding the commodity. If there's a change in fashion, so what happens? People discard the old fashion clothes and they go for costly or expensive the trendy clothes which are in fashion. If people nowadays there's a craze for health, so the demand for the goods which are related to health has increased. So this is how customers' taste and preference affects the demand for the commodity. Then comes consumers' expectation about prices, income, availability of goods in future. Now, how does his expectation about future affects his current demand? Future ki expectation, how is it affecting the current demand? That is explained here. Now, if a consumer expects a rise in the price in the future, if you're expecting that the price of the commodity is going to rise in future, what happens? You start demanding more of the commodity today, even if the price is higher. Why? So that you can avoid buying these goods at a higher price in future. Okay? Now what happens when the government announces that the price of the petrol is going to rise? You can see that there's a line of vehicles at the petrol pump. People want to get their tanks full. Why do they want to do this? So that they don't have to buy at a higher price later. Though that will not affect much, but still people follow this pattern. The next is consumers' credit facility. Demonstration effect. The next is demonstration effect. Demonstrate means when you try to copy somebody's consumption pattern or somebody's lifestyle, you start demanding those type of goods. Now, you have seen your friend carrying a mobile phone, so you want the similar model. So the demand for such commodity will increase. Or you have seen that your neighbor has bought a particular car, so you also want to have the similar car. So when you try to emulate or copy the consumption pattern of your friends, relatives, neighbors, then the demand for such commodity increases. Next is the consumer's credit facility. Now, if the availability of loan is easy, if you are easily getting loans from the bank, then you are tempted to purchase those goods which you could not have afforded otherwise. So, in this case, when the availability of credit is easy, when you are easily getting loan from the bank, you tend to buy more of the commodity. For example, demand for cars has increased partly because of the availability of bank loans. Because people are now able to pay it in installments, so it is easy for them to buy. Next is size and composition of population. Now you must understand what the size and composition of population means. When you're explaining this factor, you have to explain both the aspects. Now, size of population determines the number of consumers. If there is increase in size of the population, that means number of consumers has increased. Therefore, the demand for the commodity would automatically increase. Now, composition of population here refers that what type of people are present in the population, whether there are more number of children, more number of males, females, adults, old age people. what is the composition? Now, if the number of children is more, then the demand for goods required by them would be high. If the number of old age people is higher in the population, then the goods which are demanded by them will be high, and so on. So, this is how it affects. The next factor is climatic factor. Now, we know that in summers we tend to buy things which keep us cool. Demand for cotton cloth goes up, demand for ACs, refrigerators, coolers, ice creams, that increases in case of summers. And in winters, the demand for goods which keep you warm would increase. Heaters, blowers, hot drinks, woolen clothes, etc. increase. So this is how the climatic factor also affects the demand for the commodity. Then comes the government policy. Now, if the government increases the tax, it can be direct tax or indirect tax, the demand would fall. Now, what happens? Now, if the government is increasing the tax, say GST, the cost of the commodity would increase. And we have already studied that when the price of the commodity increases, the demand for it falls. In case the government increases the direct tax, that is your income tax, the disposable income available with the consumers will fall, and therefore they would demand less of it. Okay? On the other hand, if they spend money on the expenditure or construction of the bridges, roads, etc., then the demand for such commodity would increase. The next is distribution of income. Now, we all know that factors of production are involved in the production work, and the wages and salaries, rent, interest, all these things are given to the factor owners. Now, if this income is unequally distributed, that means only a few rich people have lots of money with them, then they would demand more for luxuries. So, in that case, demand for luxury good would increase. But if the income is evenly distributed, that means equitable distribution, almost everybody is getting the similar type of income, then in that case, demand for necessities would be more. So I hope all of you have understood the factors affecting the demand of a commodity. If there is any query, you can revert. You can ask questions in the comment column. I have clear doubts. Next topic that we would take up in the next video will be demand function and the law of demand. Thank you.